Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello again, everybody. It's David, Mike, and Greg, and this is Near Memo episode 97, if you can believe it, where we talk about all things local, search, social, commerce, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from AI this week, although David's going to talk about it tangentially. We've been very AI focused the last few weeks. Mike's going to lead us off with some discussion about some of the, after sort of effusively praising the Apple Business Connect, Mike has found some flaws that he wants to eliminate or describe. And then David and I are going to be talking about two companion surveys. Well, they're not companions, but they're sort of companions in our Wednesday newsletter. Two surveys that in touch on SEO, digital marketing. One is a big agency survey, and the other is technical SEO, the state of technical SEO survey that mostly was responded to by smaller agencies and smaller practitioners. So, Mike, why don't you take it away?
So last week, David mentioned in the talk that he had some concerns about their multi-user hierarchy for permissions and access, and
for Apple Business Connect.
For Apple Business Connect.
I have the same concerns about Google Business Profiles, but okay.
Google Business Profiles sort of solves the problems with a bit of a hack, but they do solve the problems at some level. So I created a couple locations in my personal account with Google, and after I added my second one, it became clear that permissions were not granular. I couldn't, like if I invited Barbara Oliver to my personal account, I uploaded her utility bill, whatever, and got approved. So I had Blumenthal's and Barbara Oliver. But as soon as I added her, she saw Blumenthal. I couldn't add her to just Barbara Oliver's location. I had to add her to the account and she could have access. So clearly for a small agency, that doesn't scale very well. So I thought, great, let's explore the third-party agency option. And so I drove through that whole process, which required me to associate with a Dunn's business on whose part I would get permission to be the third-party agency. So I had to create a new email address. The system is email-based, which is fine. Doesn't matter if you use the same phone number, but you have to have a new email. And I went through the process, and then they wanted to contact the mothership, my brother's business, Blumenthal's. I put in the Dunn's number. They actually set up an appointment to speak with him, and they did. There was actually a human at the other end. That was pretty amazing. The thought of having a human at the other end of a conversation. Wow. Anyways, and they got his approval that I could manage this entity that had been defined, and I got his permission. I was then approved as a third-party manager for this entity. So the architecture is sort of enterprise, sort of company level. Below that is business, in other words, like a brand, and below that is location. The problem is, though, it's still, I thought that would solve these access issues. It doesn't. An agency account is no different. So I created a new business in there, and it was a single location business. And the idea behind a business is that it has multiple locations. So it has a common logo and cover photo for all the locations. So now I can't change the cover photo. It was a business and I added one location to it. I can't change the cover photo for either the business or the location. So bug there, but okay, we'll give them that. But there's still no way to have different businesses from different entities in this single dashboard and have any granular permissions. I mean, Google deals with this in one of two ways. One is every location can have different users accessing it, which is fine if you got a few number of accounts as an agency, or with what's called a business group, where you can establish a group of businesses and assign permissions to a group of businesses. So either way, then an agency can set up a typical account and then have the owner of those businesses access it. But that's not possible with Apple. Right now, it's sort of one enterprise, one set of locations sort of structure. And if you're an agency, your dog agrees with me. If you're an agency, you're kind of fucked. Small agency. If you're a big agency, you have access to API, obviously that's going to work. But if you're small or medium agency trying to do this in the dashboard, it is really cumbersome. You effectively have to set up one account on a new email for each business that you're dealing with, which is a non-starter for most agencies.
So I'll say a couple of things. It reminds me of the amazing cluster that was the Facebook page management experience way back when, where Facebook expected everyone to log in with a personal Facebook account. Apple has the same expectation with an Apple ID sort of by default. And that just creates all kinds of problems when you are when you have any kind of multi-location business, and in particular, when you have multiple multi-location businesses, that model just does not work. So I think it also speaks to the sort of lack of domain experience, I would say, maybe not necessarily with the sort of data model for location data and that sort of thing, but domain experience in terms of what it means to be managing and marketing and all of those analyzing all of those associated activities with multiple locations. I'll even say at the same business. I tried to set this up for one of my larger healthcare clients, and initially this was just before Apple Business Connect came out, maybe 2 months before. And initially, the dashboard at the time said, "Hey, you shouldn't do this for more than 20 locations." And I was like, and I actually followed up with Apple support, and I said, "Is this a hard limit?" And they said, "No, it just doesn't really scale beyond that." And
they don't move over to the new interface in many situations. I'm seeing reports.
So mine did, which is bizarre. Yeah, we've seen a couple of tweets asking like, "Hey, what did you do?" Because I logged in and nothing was there. So I didn't do anything special, but mine were moved over. But I was going to say that the difficulty with the former multi-location setup is the same thing that Mike, that you highlighted, where it does expect, without really prompting you on this, it does expect sort of the same thing across all locations. And actually, even for my multi-location brand, there are multiple sub-brands underneath it, or service lines underneath the sort of parent brand, who all would want to have a slightly different cover photo and possibly a different logo. So there just isn't there is not, in terms of the product design as it stands today. And I actually think Apple is probably going to respond to this kind of thing and make user adjustments over time. Who knows how long it'll take. But as it stands today, it's just not very well set up for multi-location management, even within a single enterprise, as you say, Mike.
So this strikes me as a kind of rookie mistake that could have been avoided by consulting people who are actually doing multi-location management on behalf of different companies. That they Apple is a notoriously secretive company, and perhaps they didn't bring people into the process early enough to get that kind of feedback so that they could have avoided this at launch. So
potentially, I mean, the flip side is, their product design team, this is more of like a product strategy discussion, right? Their product design, I think, is flawless. Like, the actual interface is beautiful and works really well. The search function is lightning fast, like all these things. So, I mean, they clearly did a lot of user testing, but it's more of a knowing what questions to ask.
It's a use case. It's a use case scenario.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they thought about the API, but they didn't think about other scenarios involving multi-locations.
Right.
So,
yeah, there's some other interesting things in the interface. For example, if you go in and set a category, it may let you set a second one, right? Which is an upgrade from previously. But then if you go back out and you go back in again, it lets you set a third one. And so I don't really, that may be a bug. Whether the bug is the third one but I went in again, it didn't let me set a fourth one, for an example. And as you pointed out, you can't put the URL with a tracking number in to get approved. I assume they're checking against the domain. But if you go back in, you are allowed to add it. Now, several people who have access to the API have said you can't add a tracking code, but I've had information from some of these companies in the past that you can. So maybe it's the same deal where they expect the raw URL there, but they don't go back and double check after you've been approved that you changed the URL as long as the domain's in it. I don't know. But I was able to add the tracking code after the fact, which again is not very efficient, but better than a fish, I guess.
Okay, so let's move on to, let's assume that they're going to address that in some time frame.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.